Hello, everybody. This is Matthew Rand. Welcome to the Man Decree podcast. Today, I'm talking about advice you should look out for when you're getting recommendations for a gun. And this is typically coming from older men. Maybe it'd be a boyfriend, a husband, a male friend, something like that. They're generally considered for logic, but the deal is a lot of women, and this is not an insult to women, it's just that less women are part of the gun community than men. It's a mostly male dominated thing. Same with cigars. And speaking of cigars, I am smoking the AJ Fernandez New World, right? So it's a new world. Women are carrying, but sometimes they're not as big a part of the community. They don't know the areas to look for research for what they should do. And unfortunately, it's not that they don't even do research. It's just so much of it out there that you can get mixed messages. I very, very often get that. So I want to be the person to kind of give you an idea of what to look out for when getting advice, right? Because there are some very consistent, uh, I don't want to say bad advice, but misinformation given out, right? When it comes to that. So, starting off, one of the most common misinformation given out, right, is that the best gun for a woman for home defense is a double action revolver with, double action hammerless revolver, snub nose. I very often get that. And I love revolvers. I love revolvers. This isn't one of those, oh, I love the Second Amendment, but no, it's not one of those I love revolvers, but it's just that let's weigh out the advantages. What are the advantages to a double action revolver? Well, it doesn't snag in your pocket. It's basically meant for pocket carry because you don't have to worry as much about accidentally shooting yourself because the hammer is the trigger, well, the hammer and trigger are very heavy, right? Takes a lot to pull it. Usually it has to be very intentional for you to pull that trigger. So, hard for you to shoot yourself. The downside is it's harder to aim or harder to shoot accurately, right? Okay. What is the advantage of a snub nose? That's the other part of the revolver. Okay, it's easier for you to keep in your pocket. It's easier to conceal, right? What is a disadvantage? Well, when it comes to shooting at the range or shooting at home, it's also harder to aim and it doesn't give as much power. So, what is the advantage of keeping a snub nose hammerless revolver for home defense? There really isn't any. Uh, you especially if you're only loading it with 38 special, and if you're loading it with anything hotter like 357 Magnum or something, then you're getting an excessive amount of kickback. 357 Magnum is not an insane round in my opinion. I don't think it's such a devastatingly harsh recoil that you can't handle it. But it's meant for a larger gun. As a matter of fact, it's probably more meant for a uh, lever action carbine, however you want to say it. It's more meant for a lever action rifle than anything. But yes, you can shoot it out of a big revolver, right? Depending on how much you can handle, 4, 5, 6 inches, even 8 inches. It's more meant for that. You can go hunting with it, and you can absolutely use it for home defense if you can handle the recoil. But in a snub nose, that thing kicks like a mule. And if you can handle it, by all means. But what is the advantage of using it in a snub nose over a long barrel? Well, you can carry it in your pocket, but if it's for home defense, you don't need to really carry it in your pocket. Right? Well, maybe if you're like, okay, I want to go look at the door, but that could be any gun. Why specifically a snub nose revolver? That is an advice you should look out for. That is some advice you should look out for because that is very common advice. It's just something to know. All right. So, my my second point or second thing advice you should look out for is the what is it called? The um, the 22, right? Women should carry 22s. Why? I never understood that. Now, I do see a lot of women walk around. They have a 22 revolver, just or I shouldn't say revolver, 22 semi-automatic, right? And yes, there are some advantages. They carry more rounds. My kind of problem with that is not so much, right? Not so much that it's a horrible round to use for self-defense, but what are the advantages of it? You can get a few more rounds in there. What are the disadvantages of it? It's probably the most unreliable round you can get commonly in handguns because it's rim fired. Not because it's a 22. I actually have no problem being it being a 22, right? But there are other 22s. There's the TCM. There's a 5.7. There's you know other things you can go for. Even a 25 ACP. But the kind of thing with the 25 ACP is you're not going to find that round anywhere near as much. But 22 is very available. You get to practice with a lot. And you may get to the point where you're so accurate with that gun, you trust it with your life. But recommending it to someone just because it's got a little bit lighter recoil, I don't think most modern rounds like a 38 special or a 9 millimeter or 380 have so much recoil that you need to go down to a 22. Now, if you're recommending a revolver in 22, that because it holds a few more rounds and the person is a little bit more inclined to use a revolver, that's fine. But a lot of people are recommending 22s on the basis that is the deadliest round in the world, or because women can handle a recoil better than they could a 380 or a 9 millimeter. And most of the time, for me, recoil is not the big issue. If you're handling recoil poorly, and all the students I've had, if they're handling recoil poorly with a 9 millimeter or something, they're scared of the gun or they're not gripping it properly, right? They're kind of their nerves are not allowing them to grip it properly. They may be better served with a revolver or something, or just getting more practice in. And I usually don't like to subsidize stuff for practice because I know a lot of people don't really get around to uh, doing as much practice. But I think my biggest issue is that sometimes you need a certain level, right? There's somebody not driving because they don't have, I should say, uh, they don't have the skills to drive like a normal person, right? As an average driver, right? Or a little below average. And there's some people recommending that you make your way to being Mario Andretti before if you're going to be bothered being on the road at all, right? And those are two things to notice, and that leads me to the third point of advice that people should give you. You should be spending thousands of dollars on training before you even start carrying. I don't think that's necessary. I think a level of competency is all that's really required, right? It'd be safety, basically. That's the most important part. Are you competent in your safety? Are you making sure you keep your finger off the trigger? Are you never pointing it at things you don't want to destroy? Are you keeping it unloaded and checking to make sure it's unloaded every time you use it, clean it, exchange hands, whatever the case may be? Are you following the rules of gun safety? And if you store it for any length of time, right? If it's not in use, is it unloaded and put away, safety and locked away, right? Those are the things that you really need to pay attention to. Don't keep it off body, right? If you're around people or around a place where there's other people, don't just put it in your purse and go set it in a grocery cart, or leave it leave it laying out where people can see it in your car and different stuff like that. Your car is not a holster. You should keep things locked up at all times, and like I said, unload it if it's not in use. So when you take all that in consideration, those are the things you really need to practice. All those tactical classes are good to take sometimes, but that doesn't mean that that's the level in which you need to be. I even said somebody says like, "Oh yeah, man, you need to be able to rack your gun off of your holster, and your gun should be beat to death, and you should have already exchanged parts and shot thousands of rounds before you even bother carrying." I think that's a bit excessive. I think once people have gotten the basics down, they can carry, but they should pursue more training so they can do what it's meant for efficiently, if ever so be they need it, right? But Some people train because they're doing it professionally, right? Mario Andretti. And some people train because they're doing it competently, right? People who have their driver's license and are good citizens of the road, right? There's two completely different categories. We're just trying to be good, safe citizens when we carry our firearms, right? We want to keep people safe. We want to keep the ones we love safe. And we only want to point it at the people who are threatening us physically, right? Or threatening the ones we love physically. That's it. That's all it's really meant for. Just, you don't go around slapping people with your wallet because that's not what a wallet is meant for, right? That's, you pull it out when you need to purchase something. Otherwise, you don't just leave it dawdling around. Well, some people do, but that, typically you do it when you have people you trust around. You don't go into a shady area and just leave it sitting there, right? Keep it on you. Keep it close. That's what the weapon is meant for. It's a weapon. Regardless of how you want to think about it, it's a weapon. You don't leave weapons sitting around. You don't leave your car keys. You shouldn't leave your car running with kids in the car. It's a dangerous thing to do. Think about your options, right? If you have a teenager who you think like, they might be trying something shady, or I don't know if I could trust them, lock your keys up. Keep your keys locked away. Don't just leave them sitting out on the table. Everybody thinks their teenager's a precious little darling and wouldn't dare. But, hey, keep your keys in check. And same thing with the firearm. Keep it in check. A lot of people don't bother doing that. But those are the things you need to focus on. And those are the main things I've heard before. And I've heard the shotgun thing, right? Everybody's heard the shotgun thing. Oh, all you need is a shotgun just so you can, you don't even really need the bullets. You just need the shotgun so you can rack the slide in case there's ever a bad guy. You just rack the slide. And this is the big bad wolf scenario. I hear this a lot of times, right? Oh, I'm going to get a bow and arrow, or if somebody ever gets in, I'm just going to rack the slide on the shotgun and then they'll go away. Bad guys are not the big bad wolf. They do not knock on the door, announce themselves, and give you 5 minutes to open the door, or else they're gonna huff and puff and blow the door down. Does it happen? Yeah, maybe. But most of the time they're either assuming you're not home, right? Or they know there's something you have and they're going to get it one way or the other. And that something you may have may be you. Whatever the case may be, you have to think past those things, right? Oh, I'm going to get a bow and arrow. Okay, well, everybody has a plan. Like Mike Tyson says, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face, right? That's what a fight is, right? Okay, you're planning on doing something to somebody. Okay, you're planning for the most perfect scenario in the world. The perfect scenario may simply just not happen. And you have to think past that. Why do people carry more than 10 rounds? Because if you ever so happen to be in a shootout, right, you're going to want those more than 10 rounds. The lesser rounds, or the more powerful rounds, are more for close encounters, right? Yes, when somebody actually does smash in the door. But most of the time, people aren't. That's not what people are doing. They don't. They. A lot of times, what happens when it comes to a home invasion is they think you're not home, right? Or it's a bad guy and a bad guy. But you don't go on, I don't want to say estimations, right? You don't base your life around statistics. You know your life and you know what you should do for your life. I've been in situations that a lot of people think are statistically impossible. You know, a lot of people think that. Oh, that would never happen. That would never happen to me. Oh, that'll never happen to you. And then when it finally does happen, their mind is so blown. They're like, well, their solution to it is, well, why don't you just be rich, so you won't have those problems? Like, yeah, you know what? why didn't everybody else in that situation think of that? Just be rich, man. Just buy a house in a nicer area. Why didn't we just think of that, right? It's just silly. But yeah, you get in those situations. A lot of times it just gets brushed off, until it gets particularly egregious. Then that's when everybody pays attention. But unless it's particularly egregious, you're not going to hear it on the news. You're not going to hear it, announced all over the place. People aren't going to be marching the streets over it because to them it's day to day, right? They're not going to But yeah, they'll report when something particularly egregious happens in Detroit or when people are making a fuss about it. There was a couple that were burnt alive in the car in Detroit. That's not something that specific situation isn't something that happens all the time. But people do get killed every day, and they're not always going to be on the news because they may be like, "Oh, it seemed like gang on gang violence," or "Oh, it's just a typical blah 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 situation." Right? They're not going to announce every little situation, but a lot of times when someone is getting hit or someone's getting murdered, it's self defense. But police may not want to look at it as self defense. Oh, why are you fighting with these people? Why was there an issue? Why would they come after you? They're going to interrogate the crap out of you. And they're going to look at you like you caused it. Right? The same thing even happens when it's in a S dot assault case, right? When you have those certain type of R word cases and situations that go on, right? They badger the person. That's why a lot of these cases, I don't want to say aren't reported, but they don't. A lot of them never. A lot of stuff never comes from them, because once there's so much badgering, a person's like, man, this is almost as bad as what I went through, and if it's not almost as bad, it's still pretty horrible, right? First you get assaulted, and then you're getting badgered on top of that. None of this is, it doesn't feel better, right? Having to describe every little thing that happened to you to some stranger who's heard it, 10 more times that day and still may not even be believing you. A lot of people discount that very heavily. And sometimes there are people who are liars, and that makes it so much worse. And sometimes it's somewhere in the whole story is somewhere in the middle. If the story doesn't make sense, it's going to be hard to sell it to a jury. And that makes everything hard, right? So a lot of these times, like somebody comes and they come to start something with you, you could just be related to somebody. And that's usually what a lot of the times it is. You're related to somebody that's involved in something. In these self defense situations, you could be related to a drug dealer. You don't always choose the circumstance that you're in. Your parents can be a drug dealers. Your sister can be a drug dealer. Your brother can be like. These situations aren't as cut as dry as a lot of people want to make them think. I'm from the Detroit area, and sometimes when I tell people like, "Oh yeah, I was over in Detroit," and they're like, "What were you doing over there? That's such a bad area." I'm like, "Where did you think I was from?" Well, fair enough. I don't talk like I'm from Detroit, but you get the point. They, it's hard for some people to even think that you may live in a bad area. Like, well, what were you doing being born there? It's odd. People are living their own world. They live in their own bubble, and they assume everybody else has their same circumstances. And it's hard for them to picture that other people were dealt such a horrible karma. That's where that concept of karma came from, because they want to justify the fact that some people are living crappier lives than others, right? Oh, wow, man, why is my life so horrible? You must have deserved it. You had to do something, right? The world is fair. And if the world is fair, you shouldn't be living like that, so it must be your fault. What a horrible thing to tell somebody. That's why I like Jesus. Honestly, that that mindset push. I grew up in a Christian household, and the other household. I mean, they both believe in Jesus, but in very different ways on both sides of my family. But I will say this: it's listening to the explanations of all the wrong in the world that made me lean a little bit more towards Christianity. Right? I'm just being completely honest. If you tell me that karma stuff, and I'm supposed to listen to that and be like, okay, yeah, it was somebody's fault in another life, even if that's true, to just think of somebody as, oh, you deserve it, or you deserve that, you deserve this. It doesn't make sense that people should be the judge of that. And when the first book I read in the Bible was Job, and that was kind of the message, right? You had all his friends being like, well, come on, Job. Obviously, you did something to deserve this. He's like, I didn't do nothing. Right? I mean, paraphrasing it, it's not the quote from the Bible, but yeah, he didn't do anything. right? But they were convinced he must have. Something in us inherently believes in karma because it's not that our world is absent of karma, it is not the explainer of everything. And the whole wrap up is only God really gets to judge us. Not in the sense like you can't look at somebody who's, doing horrible things and say, yeah, you're a pretty crappy person. More in the lines of, you know, what's going on with us. You don't get to decide what to do with that person, right? If they're not doing anything to you, they're not harming you, they're not bothering you. Sure, they decide to smoke crack. That doesn't mean you get to pull them off to the side and stone them to death, right? That's not your call, right? Because there's something you've probably done that was worthy of the same thing. We all mess up. And if if we all got what was coming to us, right, for that, man, it would be bad. And that's why, honestly, that's why I believe in Christianity. But I can't say I'm a huge, perfect Bible thumping Christian. It's just that's what leads me to that point. I don't know how I got all the way from what to recommend, recommendations to look out for bad firearm advice, but and got all the way to you know New World by AJ Fernandez, and then a little Christian talk. But I don't know, maybe I'll do that a little more often. Anyway, thanks for tuning in. You comment, you let me know what is some bad advice you feel like you've heard. Maybe it was from me, I don't know. But what's some bad, gun advice you've been like, yeah, people probably, some FUD logic. We've all heard a little. If you're in the gun community, you've probably heard a little FUD logic. You let me know what you've heard. Anyway, thanks for tuning in. If you made it this far, I really appreciate it. Please leave a comment, let me know. Peace.